The security guard's hand landed on his shoulder like a verdict. "Sir, I'm going to need you to leave." The entire ballroom turned. Crystal glasses paused midair. Conversation died. 300 people in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos stared at the man in the faded work jacket standing at the edge of the most expensive room in Manhattan. And every single one of them had already decided who he was. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, just looked down at his 9-year-old daughter, who was clutching a small envelope to her chest like it was the most important thing she'd ever held. It was. If this story moves you, hit like, drop your city in the comments, and follow along to the very end. I want to see how far this reaches. The invitation had come in the mail on a Tuesday, tucked between a water bill and a grocery store circular. Damon Cross almost threw it out. He'd stood at the kitchen counter for a long moment, turning the heavy cream envelope over in his hands. The paper alone probably cost more than his lunch. The return address was the Meridian Foundation, one of those charitable organizations with a name that sounded like a law firm and a board of directors that read like a Forbes list. The gala was black tie. The venue was the Ashford Grand, 53rd floor, skyline views. The cause was the Children's Hospital on the east side where Emma had spent 11 days 2 winters ago when her appendix nearly killed her. That was the detail that made him keep it. He'd set it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like the state of Virginia, and for 3 days he'd walked past it without committing to anything. On the 4th day, Emma found it. "Dad?" She'd come to him in the living room that evening, where he was sorting hardware receipts on the coffee table. She held the invitation with both hands, reading it carefully the way she read everything, like the words deserved to be treated respectfully. "Is this real?" "It's real." "Can we go?" He'd looked at her. She was 9, almost 10, with her mother's dark eyes and a gap in her front teeth that the dentist said would correct itself eventually. She was wearing pajama pants with tiny foxes on them and one of his old flannel shirts, which hung past her knees. She looked ridiculous. She looked like the whole world. "It's a fancy event," he said. "Not really our kind of thing. The money goes to the Children's Hospital." She said it like that settled it, and honestly, it kind of did. Yes. Damon Cross had been a lot of things in his life. A kid from a working-class family in coastal Virginia who'd enlisted at 18 because college wasn't financially realistic, and he needed a direction. A Navy SEAL by 22, which had less to do with heroism than with the fact that he was stubborn past the point of good sense and physically incapable of quitting once he'd started something. A husband, a father, a widower at 31, sitting in a hospital corridor at 2 a.m. while a doctor told him in careful, measured language that there was nothing more they could do. Now he was 33, and he ran a small contracting company with 4 employees and a leased truck that needed a new alternator. He had a 9-year-old daughter who was smarter than him in ways he was only beginning to understand, a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was technically in transition, and a fridge that was always exactly half full. Not from poverty, not exactly, but from the particular discipline of someone who'd learned early that resources had limits and waste was a form of disrespect. He did not own a tuxedo. He owned one blazer, dark navy, which he'd bought for his wife's cousin's wedding 4 years ago. It still fit across the shoulders but was a little loose in the chest now. He'd dropped weight in the years since, slowly, the way grief takes things from you without announcing itself. He paired it with dark slacks and a clean white shirt, and spent more time than he'd admit getting the collar right. Emma wore the navy dress she'd worn to her school's winter concert. She'd polished her own shoes. She'd done her own hair, 2 careful braids that weren't quite even, but that she was proud of. And Damon hadn't said a word about the asymmetry, because why would he? They took the subway. It was a 40-minute ride with 1 transfer, and Emma spent most of it with her small canvas bag in her lap, occasionally checking inside it, the way someone checks to make sure their wallet is still there. "Stop looking at it," Damon said. "It's not going anywhere. I just want to make sure the envelope doesn't get bent." The envelope contained $43 in cash. Emma had been saving since September. Birthday money, allowance, the occasional dollar she found in jacket pockets. And she'd decided 3 months ago that she wanted to donate it to the Children's Hospital in memory of the nurses who'd taken care of her. She'd written their names on a piece of paper inside the envelope, Nurse Terry, Nurse Marcus, Nurse Chen. Damon had not told her the donation minimum listed on the foundation's website was $500. He figured they'd work it out when they got there. The Ashford Grand's lobby alone was enough to make you recalibrate. It was all white marble and brass fixtures and flower arrangements the size of small trees, with a string quartet playing near the elevator bank and guests arriving in a steady stream of black cars. The women wore things that cost more than Damon's truck. The men looked like they'd been assembled by a department store. Damon and Emma walked in from the street because they'd gotten off the subway 2 blocks north and hadn't thought to rearrange their entrance. The doorman looked at them, a quick, professional scan, and said nothing because his job was technically just to open the door. At the registration table on the 53rd floor, a young woman in a headset checked the guest list with practiced efficiency. "Cross," Damon said. "Damon Cross, +1. She scrolled, found it, glanced up at him once, at the faded work jacket he'd pulled on over the blazer because the night was cold and it was the only outer layer he owned, and smiled the kind of smile that is performing helpfulness rather than feeling it. "Welcome, Mr. Cross. Enjoy your evening." The ballroom was something else. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the Manhattan skyline, the city below glittering like something that existed in a different reality from the subway they'd just ridden. Round tables with white linen and centerpieces involving orchids and candles. A stage at the far end, currently empty. Open bar along one wall, catering stations along another. Everywhere you looked, money was quietly announcing itself. Emma pressed close to his side for exactly 12 seconds. He counted, because it was something he did without thinking, a leftover instinct from years of tracking details in environments where details mattered. And then she straightened up and started looking around with genuine curiosity. "It's really pretty," she said. "Yeah," he agreed. "Do you think we can get something to eat before the program starts?" They hadn't eaten since noon. He'd been at a job site until 6, running behind on a bathroom renovation that had revealed a plumbing problem the homeowner hadn't disclosed. Emma had eaten a granola bar on the subway. He spotted the catering station and started steering them toward it. That was when the security guard appeared. He materialized from the left, broad-shouldered and wearing the kind of expression that had been carefully trained to look neutral while communicating something else entirely. His name tag said Garrett. He stepped directly into Damon's path with the specific confidence of someone who'd made this kind of calculation before and trusted his own read. "Sir?" His voice was measured, carrying just enough authority to be heard without technically making a scene. "Can I ask who you're here with tonight?" Damon stopped. "I'm a guest." "Are you with a table? Do you have an escort?" "I have an invitation. I'm a registered guest." Garrett's eyes moved to Emma briefly, then back to Damon. They moved over the work jacket. Whatever conclusion they landed on it fast. "I'm going to need you to come with me, sir. I think there may have been a clerical—" "There wasn't a clerical anything." Damon's voice stayed flat. This was a tone he'd developed over years. Not aggressive, not defensive, just immovably calm in a way that was harder to dismiss than anger would have been. "I registered. I'm on the list. The woman at the table checked it." "I understand that, sir, but I'm not going anywhere." The first few guests nearby had noticed the slight pause in their conversations, the almost imperceptible turn of heads. Garrett stepped closer. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me, or I'll need to call additional—" "I heard you." Damon didn't move. "I'm not leaving until my daughter gets a chance to make her donation." And that was when it became something. Because Garrett had been about to physically redirect him, Damon could read the body language, had spent years reading body language in contexts where misreading it got people killed. And instead Garrett's hand landed on his shoulder, and the room shifted. It wasn't a grab. It was the kind of contact that was technically guidance, the kind that let you say later, "I was just trying to redirect him," while everyone watching understood exactly what was happening. Emma looked up. "Dad?" Her voice was small. Not scared exactly, more like she was asking a question with one word and hoping the answer would be something she could manage. Damon looked down at her, the envelope in her hands. 3 months of saved dollars, 11 nurses' names written in her careful handwriting, a 9-year-old's sincere and uncomplicated faith that the right thing to do with money you'd been given was to give it to someone who needed it more. He looked back at Garrett. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet enough that only the 4 or 5 people immediately around them could hear it. "Take your hand off my shoulder." Garrett didn't. "Sir, I need you to, I'm a veteran." Still quiet. "I'm a registered guest. I have an invitation in my jacket pocket that you are welcome to read. My daughter has a donation she wants to make to the Children's Hospital, which is the stated purpose of this event. And I am asking you, one more time, to remove your hand from my shoulder." Something in the delivery, not the words exactly, but the complete and total absence of performance in them, made Garrett pause. This wasn't the voice of someone making a scene. It wasn't a threat. It was simply a man who had already decided what he was going to do and was offering one last opportunity to avoid an outcome that would be worse for everyone. By now, more of the room had noticed. The conversations had thinned. People were angling their bodies while pretending not to. A woman in a gold evening gown near the catering station said, not quietly enough, "Someone should call." "I'm fine," Emma said. Everyone looked at her. She hadn't said it loudly, but she'd said it clearly, and something about a 9-year-old in a navy dress and uneven braids saying, "I'm fine," with that particular kind of composure stopped the room in a way that shouting couldn't have. She was holding the envelope with both hands. She looked at the security guard with the frank, unsentimental gaze of a child who has spent enough time in hospitals to have lost her fear of adults who are pretending to have authority they don't actually have. "We're not causing any trouble," she said. "My dad's on the list. I checked the website and everything." Garrett's jaw moved slightly. "We just want to give our donation," Emma continued, "and then we'll leave you alone." The next 30 seconds existed in that specific kind of suspended time where everyone in a room is waiting to see which direction something falls. Garrett had not removed his hand. Damon had not moved. Emma stood between them with her envelope and her uneven braids and her 9-year-old's absolute moral clarity, and the assembled wealth of Manhattan's upper tier watched from behind their champagne glasses and tried to figure out which way to angle their sympathies. A man in a tuxedo near the bar said something to the woman beside him, quietly, dismissive. And the woman laughed, a small bright sound that carried. Damon heard it, didn't look at them, kept his eyes on Garrett. "Last time," he said. And that was precisely the moment the elevator doors at the far end of the ballroom opened and Victoria Hale walked in. He didn't know who she was. He had no reason to. She was a CEO, not a soldier, and his knowledge of the business world extended to contractor rates and materials pricing, not to the women who ran the companies that used those materials. He registered her the way he registered everything in a room, her position relative to the exits, her velocity, her focal point. Her focal point, it turned out, was him. She'd come in mid-stride, pulling off a coat and handing it to someone without breaking pace, phone in her other hand, the specific energy of someone who'd been running behind and knew it. She'd been scanning the room the way people do when they're looking for whoever they're supposed to find first. And then she stopped. 30 feet away. She stopped completely. Damon didn't understand the look on her face. It was too complex for the situation as he understood it. Something happening in her eyes that had no relationship to a security guard and a man in a work jacket and a 9-year-old girl. It was recognition. Not of his name, not of his resume. Something older than that. She started walking toward them, and the crowd parted in the particular way that crowds part for people who are used to walking through them. And Garrett heard the change in the room before he saw her, and his hand finally, dropped from Damon's shoulder. Victoria Hale crossed the ballroom floor and stopped 2 feet in front of Damon Cross, and looked at him for a moment that was entirely too long to be casual and entirely too quiet to be a mistake. Then she said, and her voice was perfectly steady even though her eyes were not, "I know you." Damon said nothing. 3 years ago," she said, "the Westfield building on 48th. The fire." The room had gone completely silent. Damon looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, barely, just around the jaw. The way a person looks when a door opens onto a room they'd thought they'd closed permanently. I didn't know your name, Victoria said. I never knew your name. She took one more breath, and something in her shoulders came down, like a weight she'd been carrying had just been handed to someone else. I've been looking for you for 3 years. Emma looked up at her father. He was still looking at Victoria Hale, and for the first time all evening, Damon Cross didn't quite know what to say. The silence that followed Victoria Hale's words was the kind that has weight to it, not the polite, performative quiet of a room waiting for a speech to begin. Something denser than that. The kind of silence that happens when 300 people realize simultaneously that they have misread a situation so completely that the correction is almost physically disorienting. Damon Cross stood in the middle of it and said nothing because he didn't know what to say, and he'd learned a long time ago that speaking into a silence you don't understand rarely improves anything. Victoria was still looking at him. Up close she was younger than he'd expected. Early 30s, maybe, with dark hair pulled back and the kind of composure that looked structural rather than practiced, like it was load-bearing. But there was something happening underneath that composure right now, something she was working to keep contained, and it wasn't succeeding entirely. Her eyes were doing things her face was trying not to. The Westfield building, she said again, quieter this time, like she was saying it for herself rather than for the room. 4th floor. The east stairwell was already blocked, and I couldn't find the west exit, and I was... She stopped, swallowed. I thought I was going to die in there. Garrett, the security guard, had taken 2 steps back. His body language had shifted completely. The authority had drained out of it, replaced by something that looked like a man recalibrating in real time. Emma looked up at her father. He was still watching Victoria with that closed, careful expression, the one he used when he was processing something that he hadn't given himself permission to feel yet. You got me out, Victoria said. You carried me down 2 flights. You handed me to the paramedics, and you told them my name was on the 8th floor tenant roster because I wasn't able to talk, and then you went back in. She paused. They told me afterward. The paramedics. They said you went back in. Someone in the crowd behind them made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. The involuntary kind. I asked for your name, Victoria continued. The paramedics didn't know it. The fire department couldn't identify you. I hired someone to look into it, and they couldn't find you either. A muscle in her jaw moved. I thought maybe I'd imagined some of the details. You know how trauma does that. It makes things blurry at the edges. But I didn't imagine your face. Damon looked at her for another long moment. Then he said, There were 2 other people on that floor. I know. Her voice was steady. They told me, a man and his assistant. They made it out on the west side. I wasn't looking for recognition. I know that too. She held his gaze. That was obvious 3 years ago, and it's obvious right now, given... She glanced at Garrett, and something moved across her expression that wasn't quite anger but was close enough to it. Given how you were being treated when I walked in. The room was very still. Victoria turned. She wasn't a tall woman, but she had a way of using the space she stood in that made height irrelevant. And when she looked at Garrett, it was with the particular directness of someone who has been running a company since 26 and has long since stopped moderating her reactions for the comfort of people who've made mistakes. Who authorized you to approach this guest? Garrett's face had gone careful. I observed someone who appeared to... Who authorized you? A beat. Standard protocol for unescorted. He's a registered guest. She said it without raising her voice. His name is on our list. He received an invitation from this foundation. He attended tonight to support the Children's Hospital. She let that land for a moment. Is there anything about that situation that falls outside standard protocol for a gala guest? Garrett said nothing. We'll talk later, Victoria said, and turned back to Damon. Just like that. No lingering, no performance of punishment. She'd said what needed saying, and she was done with it. I owe you an apology on behalf of this event, she said to Damon. What happened when you walked in tonight? She stopped, seemed to want to choose her words carefully, and then gave up on careful. It was wrong, and I'm sorry. Damon nodded once. Not dismissive, just the acknowledgement of someone who isn't looking for an extended apology and doesn't need one. My daughter wanted to make a donation, he said. Victoria blinked. It was the last thing she'd expected him to say in that moment, And for exactly half a second, the composure cracked and she almost smiled. Not the social smile she'd been wearing when she walked in, but something real and slightly undone. "Then let's make sure that happens," she said. Emma, who had been standing very still through all of this with her envelope against her chest, exhaled a breath she'd clearly been holding for several minutes. "Hi," she said to Victoria. "I'm Emma." Victoria looked down at her with an expression that took a moment to settle into something she could control. "I know," she said. "I've just heard your dad is incredibly hard to find, so I'm very glad you two are here tonight." "He's not hard to find," Emma said. "He's usually at work or making dinner." She considered. "Or fixing something. He's always fixing something." "That tracks," Victoria said, and this time the almost smile made it all the way. She didn't make a production of resettling them into the event. That was the thing Damon noticed. She could have easily turned their reintroduction into a moment, called attention to it, used it. She didn't. She found them a table near the front that had 2 open seats, the Foundation's own reserved table, as it turned out. And she got Emma a plate of food from the catering station herself, without delegating it to a staff member, and she sat down across from them with a glass of water, and for a few minutes it was just 3 people at a table while the ballroom gradually resumed its own noise around them. "You should eat something too," Emma told her. "I had something at the office." That was probably hours ago. Victoria looked at her. "How old are you?" 9, almost 10. "You sound significantly older." "My dad says that too." Emma was already working through a small plate of hors d'oeuvres with the focused efficiency of someone who'd been promised food and was not taking it for granted. "He says I've always been an old soul. I think I just pay attention." Damon across the table was quiet. He'd accepted a glass of water and was holding it without drinking, and Victoria recognized the posture. It was the posture of someone who was in a room they hadn't expected to be in, processing the distance between where they'd imagined the evening going and where it had actually gone. "You work construction?" she asked him. "Contracting." He glanced at her. "Small company? Residential and some commercial. 4 guys." He paused. 5, technically, but one of them is more of a consultant who shows up when he wants to. "How long have you been doing it?" "Little over 2 years, started while I was transitioning out." "Transitioning out meaning the Navy." He set the glass down. "I did 12 years. Last 4 as an instructor after I got out of active deployment. Medically wasn't cleared for another rotation, so..." He said it plainly, without self-pity, and without the practiced brevity of someone who'd rehearsed that sentence to avoid follow-up questions. Just a fact. "Started the company because I knew how to work with my hands, and I didn't know what else to do with that." Victoria nodded. She didn't say thank you for your service, which was the thing people said when they didn't know what else to say, and wanted to signal they were one of the good ones. He'd probably heard it 10,000 times. Instead, she said, "Is it enough? The work?" He looked at her. It wasn't the question he'd expected. "It pays the bills. Keeps me close to home." A glance at Emma. "That matters more than it used to." "When did Emma's mother..." She stopped herself. "Sorry, that's not..." "2 years ago," he said. "Cancer. About 8 months after I got out." The table was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," Victoria said. "Yeah." He picked up the glass again. It was a rough stretch. That was all he said about it. Not because he was guarding it. Victoria got the sense he wasn't someone who guarded things as a performance of toughness, but because rough stretch was simply and accurately what it had been, and there wasn't a better phrase that added more information than those 2 words already carried. Emma, without looking up from her plate, reached over and put her hand briefly on Damon's forearm. It was the gesture of someone very practiced at this particular kind of quiet comfort, the kind of comfort that doesn't announce itself, just appears. He put his hand over hers for a second, and then she went back to eating. Victoria watched that exchange and kept her expression neutral, but something shifted somewhere behind her sternum. The program was scheduled to begin at 8:30. By 8:15, Victoria had been pulled into a brief conversation with the Foundation's executive director, a compact, sharp-eyed man named Philip Marsh, who had the energy of someone who'd been coordinating large events for decades and had learned to stay calm by converting all anxiety into forward motion. We've got the welcome remarks, the video package, the live auction items. He was ticking things off a mental list while simultaneously watching the room. And I've confirmed the keynote with Senator I want to change the program, Victoria said. Philip stopped ticking. We're 40 minutes out. I know. The senator is already here. He's had 3 drinks and he's expecting to speak. He can still speak. I just want to add something. Philip looked at her. They'd worked together for 4 years. He knew that look. What are you adding? I'll know when we get there, she said. He made the specific sound of a man who has learned that arguing with Victoria Hale is a calculation, and the calculation rarely comes out in your favor. Fine, he said. I'll build in flexibility after the video package. Thank you, Philip. You're going to give me gray hair, Victoria. You already have gray hair. More gray hair, he said, and walked away. Damon had not been told about any of this. He was at the table with Emma, who had finished her food and was now people-watching with frank, open interest. She'd always done this, cataloged the humans around her with the thoroughness of someone conducting field research, when Victoria came back and sat down. The program's starting in a few minutes, she said. Okay. He looked around at the room, which was beginning to settle. We should find the donation station. Emma's been waiting. I'll take you there after the video. I want to make sure it's handled properly. She paused. And I want to ask you something. He looked at her. I want to introduce you tonight, during the program. The look on his face was immediate and clear. No. I know, she said quickly. I know that's not why you came, and I know that's not who you are. But there are 300 people in this room who just watched a security guard try to remove you from a gala you had every right to attend. And most of them made the same judgment Garrett did before he walked over. They looked at your jacket, and they decided. She held his gaze. You don't owe these people anything. That's not the argument. But there's something that could happen here tonight that would matter beyond this room. And I think you're the only person who can make it happen. Damon was quiet. I'm not asking you to perform anything, she continued. I'm not asking for a speech about your service or a feel-good story for the donors. I'm asking if you'd be willing to stand in that room and just be honest. She paused. You're very good at honest. You've known me for 20 minutes. I've been thinking about you for 3 years. She said it without any shade to it, a fact, plainly delivered. You walked into a burning building because there was someone in it who needed help, and then you walked away without telling anyone your name. That's not a performance of character. That's just character. She leaned forward slightly. These people need to be in the same room as that. They don't know what it looks like anymore. Damon looked at Emma, who was very deliberately eating a dinner roll and not making eye contact, which meant she'd heard every word and was executing her personal strategy of letting him think he was making decisions independently. Emma? He said. You have an opinion. She took a bite of the roll, chewed thoughtfully. I think Ms. Hale is asking really nicely, she said. That's not an opinion. That's an observation. I think you should do it, Emma said, abandoning the pretense. She put the roll down and looked at him. Not because of the stuff she said about the room, though that's probably true, but because you always tell me that how you carry yourself matters, that people learn from watching, not from being told. She met his eyes. So let them watch. The table was quiet. Victoria said nothing. She'd made her case, and she knew better than to oversell it. Damon looked at his daughter for a long moment, then at his water glass, then at some middle distance that didn't contain either of them. When he finally looked back at Victoria, his expression had shifted. Not into agreement exactly, but into the particular territory that precedes agreement in a person who doesn't make decisions quickly. I don't have anything prepared, he said. Good, she said. Prepared is the last thing this room needs. The program began at 8:42, which was close enough to on time that Philip Marsh only glanced at his watch twice. The welcome remarks were delivered by the Foundation's board chair, a silver-haired man with a good voice and the practiced warmth of someone who'd made this speech before and knew the places where you paused to let the room respond. The video package ran 11 minutes and showed the Children's Hospital in the kind of careful, human detail that makes people want to give money. Not exploitatively, but honestly. Sick kids and tired parents and nurses who worked double shifts in a pediatric oncology ward where someone had painted the ceiling tiles with cartoon fish because a 7-year-old had asked if she could see the ocean. Emma watched the whole thing without speaking. At one point, she pressed the envelope a little flatter against the table, smoothing a corner that wasn't bent. When the video ended, Victoria walked to the stage. She thanked the board. She thanked the donors. She gave a clean, direct summary of the foundation's goals for the coming year. Not a corporate presentation, not a fundraising pitch, just someone who knew what the organization did and believed in it. She was good at this. Damon watched her from the table and understood, in the way you sometimes understand things about people before you can articulate them, that the competence wasn't something she wore for the room. It was just how she operated. Then she paused. "Before we move to the live auction," she said, "I want to introduce someone." The room settled. "Most of you were in this room earlier this evening when a man and his daughter were confronted near the entrance by one of our security staff." She said it without softening it. The assumption, the very fast, very confident assumption made by a lot of people in this room, myself not here to exempt from that, was that they didn't belong. She let that sit. I want to talk about that assumption for a moment because I think it matters, and I think it especially matters because of who this man is. She looked toward Damon's table. He felt the shift in the room before he processed it. 300 people orienting toward him simultaneously. Emma put her hand briefly on his arm again. Different from before. This one was more like, "I'll be right here." 3 years ago, Victoria said, there was a fire in a building on 48th Street. I was on the 4th floor. The east stairwell was already compromised. I couldn't find the other exit. The smoke was... She paused, and this time it wasn't for effect. The smoke was bad enough that I wasn't going to find it in time. The room was absolutely still. A man came through the smoke. He didn't announce himself. He didn't ask my name. He got me out. He handed me to paramedics. He made sure they had my information, and then he went back in for 2 other people. She took a breath. I never knew his name. I spent 3 years not knowing his name. She looked at Damon again. Tonight he walked into this gala in a work jacket to support a children's hospital with his 9-year-old daughter, and the first thing that happened to him was someone tried to remove him from the room. Her voice was steady. The steadiness was the thing. No performance of emotion, just the clean, dry-eyed delivery of someone telling the truth to a room that needed to hear it. The man who saved my life was treated like he didn't belong in it. Somewhere near the back, a chair shifted. His name is Damon Cross, Victoria said. He's a former Navy SEAL. He runs a small contracting company in this city. He's raising his daughter alone. And he came here tonight not because anyone invited him to be honored or recognized or celebrated. He came here because his daughter wanted to donate to the children's hospital. She paused. $43, which she saved herself over 3 months. Damon, at the table, felt something move through the room. Not applause, not yet. Something that came before applause. The specific stillness of a large group of people realizing that their initial read was wrong enough to be embarrassing, and sitting with that embarrassment without looking for somewhere to put it. I'd like to invite Damon to the stage, Victoria said. Not to make a speech, not to perform anything for this room, just, she seemed to consider the right word, just to be in it, because I think we could all use the reminder of what it looks like to be a person whose character has nothing to do with what they're wearing. Damon didn't move for a moment. Emma looked at him, not with the nudging look of a child trying to get a parent to do something, more like the look of someone who has complete confidence in a decision and is just waiting for it to be made. He pushed back his chair, scraped on the floor, a small, unglamorous sound in the middle of all that marble and chandelier light. He stood up, smoothed his slacks out of habit, and walked toward the stage. He didn't rush. He didn't perform ease either. He just walked the way he always walked. Deliberate, unhurried, the walk of someone who'd spent years moving through environments where how you carried yourself communicated more than your words, and the room watched him do it in complete silence. He climbed the 3 steps to the stage. Victoria handed him the microphone. Their eyes met for a moment, just a moment, and she stepped back. 300 people waited. Damon looked out at the room, at the white tablecloths and the orchid centerpieces and the evening wear and the champagne glasses and the faces. So many faces, all turned toward him, all carrying the slight particular discomfort of people who have been caught doing something they didn't realize they were doing. He was quiet for several seconds, not collecting himself. He was already collected. He was looking at them, actually looking, the way you look at a situation before you decide how to approach it. Then he said, "I want to be honest with you about something." His voice through the microphone was lower than people had expected, not performative, just his actual voice, the one he used when he was saying something he meant. "I almost didn't come tonight." No one moved. "My daughter found the invitation." A small pause. "That should tell you something about how the evening got started." A few people near the front laughed, a surprised, genuine sound. Emma, at the table, was watching him with the focused attention she gave to things that mattered to her. "I'm not comfortable in rooms like this," Damon said. He wasn't looking at any particular section of the room. He was looking at the whole thing, taking it all in with the same flat, deliberate scan he'd once used in environments where discomfort was information. "I've been in a lot of uncomfortable rooms. Forward operating bases in places most people in this room couldn't find on a map. Hospital corridors at 2 in the morning. A kitchen table after my wife died, trying to figure out how to explain to my 8-year-old what happened and why I couldn't make it better." He paused. "This is a different kind of uncomfortable, but the instinct is the same. Look at the room, figure out what's real, and tell the truth." The silence was total now. Even the service staff near the back had stopped moving. "What's real," he said, "is that I walked in here tonight and a lot of people in this room made a decision about me before I said a word." He wasn't accusing. His voice was conversational, level. "I'm not angry about that. I've been making decisions about rooms my whole life based on what I could see from the outside. Everyone does. You have to." He let that sit. "But the part that matters, the part I think about a lot, actually, is what you do when you find out you were wrong." Something in the room shifted, not dramatically, just slightly, the way a structure settles. "The security guard who stopped me tonight, his name's Garrett, he was doing his job." He looked out toward where Garrett was standing near the right wall, and the guard, who had not expected to be addressed, went very still. He saw someone who didn't fit the pattern, and he acted on it. That's not evil. That's human. We all do that. He paused. "But I had a little girl next to me holding $43 she'd saved for 3 months to give to sick children, and I knew that, and he didn't. And that's exactly the problem I'm trying to talk about. The information that matters most is almost never the information that's visible." He shifted his weight slightly. It was the only physical indication that this was something he was actually working through in real time, not reciting. "I've been a lot of places where people made decisions about who mattered and who didn't based on rank or equipment or what position they held. And I've watched that go wrong in ways I don't talk about at dinner tables." A breath. "The people who saved my life when things went badly overseas, they weren't always the ones with the most stripes. Sometimes they were 22-year-old kids from places no one had heard of who did the right thing in a moment because that was just who they were." He looked down for a moment, then back up. "Character doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear the right thing to the right event. It just shows up when it's needed, and then it goes home." Near the middle of the room, a woman had set down her champagne glass and was listening with both hands folded in her lap. "My daughter wanted to be here tonight," Damon said, "because a year and a half ago she spent 11 days in the children's hospital across town, and the nurses who took care of her treated her like she was the only patient in the building. She learned the names of all of them. She saved her own money for 3 months to say thank you in the only way she knew how." He paused. "She didn't do it for applause. She did it because someone was kind to her when she was scared, and she wanted to pass that on." His voice, for just a fraction of a second, was less steady than it had been. "That's the whole story," he said. "I don't have a lesson to give you. I just thought you should know what was actually happening when you looked at someone who didn't belong and decided what that meant." He handed the microphone back to Victoria, and for a moment nothing happened. Then someone in the front row stood up, and then the person beside them, and then another, and then the sound came. Not the polite, rhythmic applause of people fulfilling a social function, but something rawer and less organized. The sound a room makes when it has been told something it needed to hear and doesn't quite know what to do with the feeling. Damon came down the 3 steps from the stage and walked back to his table and sat down across from his daughter, and Emma looked at him for a moment with those dark eyes that were so much like her mother's that it still caught him sometimes, and she said, "That was good, Dad." "Yeah?" he said. "Yeah." She picked up her envelope. "Now, can we go find the donation table?" He almost laughed. It came out as something adjacent, a short exhale, a slight softening around the eyes. "Yeah," he said. "Let's do that." Behind them, the room was still standing. The donation table was staffed by 2 volunteers, a young woman with a tablet and a middle-aged man with a receipt printer. And when Damon and Emma approached, both of them looked up with the slightly dazed expression of people who had just watched something happen in a room and were still recalibrating. Emma set her envelope on the table with both hands. "I'd like to make a donation," she said, "for the Children's Hospital, to the nursing staff specifically, if that's possible." The young woman with the tablet, her name tag said Claire, looked at the envelope, then at Emma, then at Damon, then back at Emma. "Of course," she said, and her voice had that careful gentleness people use when they're trying not to make something into a bigger moment than the person in front of them wants it to be. "Can I get your name?" "Emma Cross." She spelled it without being asked. "And inside the envelope there's a piece of paper with the names of the nurses who took care of me, Terry, Marcus, and Chen. I don't know their last names, but I wanted them to know it came from me." Claire looked at the piece of paper Emma had unfolded from inside the envelope. Then she looked at the cash, 4 10s and 3 1s, and something shifted in her expression that she didn't quite manage to keep professional. "We'll make sure they know," she said. Emma nodded. "Thank you." That was it. No fanfare, no ceremony. She'd done the thing she came to do, and she stepped back from the table with the settled quality of someone who has completed a task they set for themselves and is at peace with how it went. Damon put his hand briefly on her shoulder. They didn't say anything to each other. They didn't need to. What happened in the next hour was the kind of thing that doesn't announce itself as significant while it's occurring. It happens in fragments. A conversation here, a handshake there, a question asked without the performance of networking, and you only understand the shape of it afterward when you can see what it added up to. It started at the bar. Damon wasn't drinking, but he drifted toward the far side of the room while Emma had been recruited by Victoria's assistant, a quick-moving young man named Derek who seemed to operate at a frequency slightly above the rest of the room, to look at the silent auction items, which included a set of art prints from a children's illustrator that Emma had immediately identified as being from a book series she loved. Standing near the bar, Damon was holding a glass of sparkling water and doing what he'd always done in rooms full of people he didn't know. Listening. Not eavesdropping, just the ambient, undirected attention of someone accustomed to extracting information from an environment by letting it come to him. A man appeared beside him. Late 50s, the kind of build that had once been athletic and was now softened without being lost. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit the way tuxedos fit when they've been made specifically for your body, and he had the particular confidence of someone who'd been in rooms like this for 30 years and had stopped finding them impressive. "Good speech," the man said. Damon glanced at him. "Wasn't really a speech." "No," the man agreed. "That's why it was good." He extended his hand. "Warren Stiles. I'm on the foundation board." Damon shook it. "Damon Cross. I know who you are. Just found out tonight, same as everyone else." Warren signaled the bartender for a refill of whatever he'd been drinking and didn't seem to be in a hurry about any of it. "What branch?" "Navy. My father was Army, Korea." He picked up his glass. He never talked about it either. "I talk about some of it," Damon said. "The parts that translate," Warren said, not as a question. "Yeah. The parts that translate." Warren nodded slowly, the way people nod when they recognize something they already understood. They stood in companionable non-silence for a moment, the room's noise filling the space between them without requiring either of them to fill it themselves. "What do you do now?" Warren asked. "Contracting, small operation." "Residential?" "Mostly. Some commercial. We did a gut renovation on a restaurant space in the Garment District last year, starting on an office build-out in Long Island City next month." He paused. "It's steady work." "You run it yourself?" "With 4 guys, 5 on busy months. Warren turned his glass slightly in his hand. He had the look of someone doing arithmetic that wasn't obviously arithmetic. You do good work? I do honest work, Damon said, which sometimes means telling clients things they don't want to hear about their timelines and their budgets. I lose some jobs that way. The ones I keep tend to go well. Warren looked at him sideways. That's a notable answer. It's the true one. Most contractors I've dealt with tell me they do great work and then the tile starts cracking in 8 months. He took a sip of his drink. I've got a development project in the planning stages. Mixed use, up in the Bronx, affordable housing component. It's the kind of project that needs people on the ground who actually give a damn about what they're building, not just what they're billing. He set his glass down and looked at Damon directly. I'm not pitching you anything tonight, just saying it's a conversation worth having if you're open to it. Damon considered this. He'd learned over the years to be wary of offers that materialize too quickly and too conveniently. He'd also learned that reflexive wariness was its own kind of error. I'm open to conversations, he said. I'm careful about commitments. Warren nodded. Good. Careful is what I need. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card, actual cardstock, heavy, none of the performative minimalism of people who thought business cards were beneath them, and handed it to Damon. Call my office next week. Tell them Warren said to put you through. Damon took the card, looked at it once, and put it in his shirt pocket. All right. Warren Stiles, a woman's voice said behind them, carrying the particular tone of mild exasperation that suggested long familiarity. Are you doing business at a charity gala? Warren turned. I'm having a conversation, Catherine. At the bar, with a man you met 40 seconds ago. We've been talking for at least 3 minutes. He looked at Damon. This is my wife. She keeps me from being entirely insufferable. I try, Catherine said. She was elegant and sharp-eyed and immediately extended her hand to Damon with the directness of someone who decided about people quickly and wasn't usually wrong. Catherine Stiles, I watched you speak earlier. You made my husband put down his phone, which is something the last 4 keynote speakers combined could not accomplish. I didn't really prepare anything, Damon said. I know. That's the part that made him put down the phone. She glanced at the spot where Emma had been. Where's your daughter? Looking at the auction items. There's a set of prints she's interested in. The Mira Lund illustrations? Catherine's expression shifted into something warmer. Those are wonderful. My grandchildren have 3 of her books. Emma has the first 2. She didn't know there was a third. There is. Catherine tilted her head slightly. The bidding on those closes in 20 minutes. You might want to wander in that direction. Emma had not placed a bid. She'd stood in front of the framed illustration prints, 4 of them, matted and mounted, the soft-line drawings that Emma had spent considerable portions of her childhood studying, with the careful, restrained look of someone who has done math and understood the outcome. The current bid was $650. She was still standing there when Damon appeared beside her. She didn't look at him, just at the prints. I know, she said before he could say anything. Know what? That we can't. I wasn't going to say that. You were going to make the face. I don't make a face. You make a face, Dad. She finally looked at him. It's okay. I looked them up online last year, and the prints are really expensive. I figured if I saw them tonight, I could at least look. She turned back to them. The third one is Lighthouse at the Edge of Maybe. I didn't know it was out. Damon looked at the prints. He looked at his daughter. He thought about the card in his shirt pocket and the project in the Bronx and the conversation that might or might not turn into something real, and then he thought about the specific particular cost of letting a kid learn too early that looking is all you get. He looked at the bid sheet. He picked up the pen. Dad, let me do something, he said. We can't afford. I know what we can afford. He wrote his name and a number that was not quite outside the boundaries of what he could manage if the Long Island City job came through on schedule, which it might not, but probably would. He set the pen down. If someone bids higher, they bid higher. But let's try. Emma looked at the sheet, then at him, the gap-toothed expression that wasn't quite a smile yet, but was building toward one. You're going to make me feel guilty about this for months, she said. No, I'm not. It's a gift. It's $650. $725, he corrected. Dad. Emma. She looked at the prints again, at the soft pencil lines of the lighthouse standing at the edge of an imaginary ocean, the small figure in the foreground who appeared in all of Miralune's work. A child, alone but not lonely, looking out at something very large with something like anticipation rather than fear. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. Someone might outbid us. Then I'll be sad for a little while and get over it. That's very mature. I learned from the best, she said, and walked back toward the main room, and Damon stood there for a moment looking at the illustration before following her. But Victoria found him near the stage 20 minutes later. The formal program had wound down. The auction was in its final stages. The senator had given his remarks with the easy fluency of someone who'd done this circuit for 20 years, and the room had shifted into the looser, warmer gear of an event that had gone well and knew it. She looked tired in a way she probably didn't know was visible. The composure was still there, but there were seams in it now. The slight tension around her eyes, the way she'd shifted out of her event mode posture into something less architectural. She was just standing there when she came to him, not arriving with an agenda. How are you doing? She asked. Fine, he considered. Better than when I walked in. That's a low bar. Sure, he agreed, but it still counts. She exhaled a short sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was adjacent. I want to apologize again, for tonight, for what happened at the door. You already apologized. I know, I wanted to do it again when it wasn't in front of 300 people. He looked at her. It's done. You handled it. I didn't handle the part where it happened in the first place. You can't control every person at an event you're running. I can set the tone. She said it with a flatness that suggested she'd already had this argument with herself and lost. Garrett's been with the Foundation's security team for 2 years. He's not a bad person. But the assumption he made tonight, I want to understand how that happened on my watch, what I did or didn't do to make that the default. Damon was quiet for a moment, watching her. There was something specific about the way she was holding herself accountable that he recognized, not the performative self-critique of someone managing optics, but the actual private ledger of someone who runs things and takes it seriously when they don't run the way they should. You know what I spent a lot of time on, toward the end of my time in the Navy? He said. She looked at him. After action reviews, he said, we debrief after every operation. What went right, what went wrong, what we'd do differently. The point wasn't punishment. The point was that the situation was a teacher and you'd be stupid not to learn from it. And you're doing an after-action review right now, on your own, at 10 o'clock at night, at the end of a gala you organized. He paused. That's the right instinct. The answer to your question probably has something to do with hiring culture and implicit assumptions that nobody ever said out loud, and therefore nobody ever examined. But you'll figure that out. He looked at her steadily. You seem like someone who's good at figuring things out. Victoria held his gaze for a moment. I am, usually. A beat. Tonight threw me more than I expected. Because of the fire thing? Because of... She stopped, started again. I spent 3 years not knowing if you were alive. I know that sounds strange. You didn't know me, but I knew what you did. I carried that. She paused. Seeing you get treated the way you were when you walked in, it wasn't just about fairness in the abstract, it felt personal. It was personal, he said. It's always personal. That's what I was trying to say up there. She nodded. They were quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? She said. You can ask. Why did you go back in after you got me out? He didn't answer immediately. It wasn't reluctance. It was the particular pause of someone locating the honest answer rather than the easy one. I heard them, he said finally. The other 2 people, through the floor. I heard them moving. He shifted his weight slightly. I couldn't not go back. That's the most accurate way I can explain it. It wasn't a decision, exactly. It was more like the alternative wasn't available to me. Victoria was quiet. I know that's not a satisfying answer, he said. It's the most satisfying answer you could have given me, she said. It means you weren't being heroic. You were just being you. He looked slightly uncomfortable with that framing, which she noted. I'm not trying to put you on a pedestal, she said. I spent a long time trying to understand why some people do what you did and most people don't. I thought maybe there was a formula, training or character or circumstances. She looked at him. I think it might just be that some people can't look away. And everything else, the SEAL training, the discipline, all of it, those are just the tools. The thing underneath them was already there. Damon said nothing for a moment. Then, my wife used to say something like that. Victoria waited. She said the training made me better at it, but it didn't make me into it. She said she could tell before I ever enlisted. He paused. She was probably right. She usually was. The noise of the room continued around them. Somewhere near the bar, Warren Stiles was talking to Philip Marsh with the emphatic body language of someone making a point. Emma had reappeared at the silent auction table, checking the bid sheet. What was her name? Victoria asked. Claire, he said. Claire Renee Cross, née Whitfield. A pause. She hated her middle name. She said Renee sounded like a character from a soap opera. I thought it was pretty. He paused again. I still think it was pretty. Victoria said nothing. She understood in the way you understand things about people who are carrying something heavy, that the pause that followed wasn't sadness exactly. It was the specific weight of someone trying to hold a person in their memory with enough precision that the memory doesn't blur. She sounds like she was great, Victoria said. She was better than me, he said. That was clear from fairly early on. I figured if she was willing to accept the arrangement, I shouldn't argue. That's an interesting way to describe a marriage. We were together 11 years. I've had a lot of time to find ways to describe it. He looked across the room toward Emma. The only fight we ever had that I really regret. She wanted to go back to school, nursing. She'd always wanted to do it and kept putting it off. And then Emma came and she put it off more, and then he stopped. She didn't get to go. The sentence landed with the particular weight of sentences that contain everything they don't say. I think about that, he said. Not all the time. But sometimes, when I see Emma with her books, or doing something that takes real patience, I think Claire would have been a remarkable nurse, and she never got to find out if she was right about herself. His jaw moved slightly. That's the part that bothers me. Not losing her in the selfish sense, but losing all the things she was going to be that she didn't know about yet. Victoria looked at him for a long time. You know that's not how most people think about losing someone. Is that right? Most people think about what they lost. You're thinking about what she lost. He didn't answer right away. She would have hated me moping about it anyway, he said finally. She was not a patience with moping kind of person. Emma seems like she has the same energy. 100%, he said. It's sometimes inconvenient. Then, Emma had, in fact, come to find them. She appeared at Damon's elbow with the silent efficiency she'd inherited from somewhere, materialized rather than arrived, and looked at Victoria with a directness that was becoming familiar. Someone outbid us, she said. Damon looked at her. The prince. Someone bid 920. She was matter-of-fact about it. No performance of disappointment. It's okay. I got to see them in person. Who bid 920? Damon said. Emma shrugged. I don't know. The bid sheet doesn't say who, just the number. He looked toward the auction table where Claire, the volunteer, was closing out the last items. Then he looked back at Emma, who was already redirecting her attention toward a conversation happening nearby with the focused interest of someone who'd filed the disappointment and moved on. It's really okay, Emma said, reading something in his face. I mean it. I was prepared for it. I know, he said. You don't have to be stoic about everything. I'm not being stoic. I'm being realistic. She tilted her head. There's a difference. There's sometimes a difference, he said. The line gets blurry. She considered this seriously, the way she considered most things he said. Maybe, she conceded, but I don't think this is the blurry kind. She turned to Victoria. Your event is really nice. The food was good. Thank you, Victoria said, with a straightness that suggested she understood Emma was not making small talk but delivering a genuine assessment. I'll pass that along to the caterer. The little pastry things were especially good, the ones with the jam in the middle. Linzer cookies. Is that what they're called? Emma nodded slowly. I had 4. Emma, Damon said. They were small, she said, without looking at him. The evening was winding toward its end. Guests were saying their goodbyes, the kind of extended departure that events like this always involve. The coats being retrieved, the last glasses being finished, the small conferences near the elevator about where everyone was going next. The room was gradually thinning, the white tablecloths now scattered with the pleasant debris of a successful night. Damon was helping Emma put on her jacket near the entrance when Garrett appeared. He came from the right, moving without the authority he'd carried earlier in the evening, which made him look slightly diminished, not physically, but in the way a person looks when they've been carrying something and have decided to put it down. He stopped about 4 feet from Damon and stood there for a moment, which was clearly difficult. "Mr. Cross," he said. Damon looked at him. "I wanted to—" Garrett stopped, tried again. "What I did when you came in tonight was wrong. Not just procedurally. I looked at you and I made a call I had no business making, and He exhaled. "I'm sorry. That's what I wanted to say." Damon was quiet for a moment. Emma, beside him, had gone very still in the specific way she went still when she was paying close attention to something important. "Okay," Damon said. Garrett blinked. "Okay?" "I appreciate you saying it." His voice was direct, without warmth or frost. "What you did made my daughter's night start badly. I'm not going to tell you that's fine, because it wasn't, but you came over here and said it clearly, and I believe you mean it." He held the man's gaze. "That's what an apology is supposed to be." "So, okay." Garrett nodded once. He looked like a man who'd been prepared for several possible responses to his apology and had not prepared for the straightforward acceptance of it. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," Damon said. "Just do better next time." "I will." He said it without qualification or elaboration, and then he nodded at Emma, who had been watching him steadily the whole time, and he walked away. Emma looked up at Damon. "That was good," she said. "What was?" "The way you handled that." She zipped her jacket. "You didn't make him feel worse than he already did, but you didn't pretend it was nothing either. He was being straight with me. Made sense to be straight back. Not everyone can do that," she said. "Be straight without being mean. Your mom was better at it than me." "You're pretty good at it," Emma said, and picked up the small canvas bag that had carried her envelope into the building, which was now empty. "Are we taking the subway?" "Yeah." "Can we stop somewhere for hot chocolate?" He thought about his wallet and the bid he'd placed, and the money he'd spent, and the card in his pocket from Warren Stiles, and whether the Long Island City job would close on time, and whether the alternator on the truck would hold for another month. "Sure," he said. "We'll find somewhere on the way." They were heading toward the elevator when Victoria caught them. She was moving quickly. The event energy had returned for a moment, the focused velocity she used when there was something specific to accomplish. She came to a stop in front of them with a slight breathlessness that was more mental than physical. "I want to do something," she said, looking at Damon. "About veterans. About employment." She was thinking out loud, clearly, which was not something she usually did in front of people she'd just met. "I've been thinking about it for a while. The gap in how companies hire veterans, how the skills don't map cleanly onto job descriptions, how good people fall through because nobody's built the infrastructure to catch them. But tonight kind of—" She paused. "It crystallized something for me. What you said up there, about character not announcing itself." Damon waited. "I want to build a program," she said, "through the foundation, something real, not a press release initiative, actual employment pathways, mentorship, skills translation. I've got the resources and I've got the network, and what I've been missing is—" She looked at him steadily. "Someone who actually knows what the gap feels like from the inside." "You're asking if I'd be involved." "I'm asking if you'd be willing to have a conversation about it. A real one. Not tonight. Tonight's done. You're going home. Your daughter wants hot chocolate." A glance at Emma that carried the ghost of a smile. "But in the next couple of weeks, come to my office. I'll have Philip there, and a woman named Dr. Reyes, who's been doing workforce development for 10 years. We'll actually talk about whether this is something that makes sense." Damon stood with this for a moment. The elevator behind them had arrived and departed without anyone pressing the button. Someone across the room laughed at something, a bright, unself-conscious sound, and the city lights behind the floor-to-ceiling windows did what city lights do, which is exist at a scale that makes everything else feel small and significant simultaneously. I'll come to the meeting, he said. I'm not committing to anything beyond that. That's all I'm asking. And I'll say the same thing to you that I said to the foundation board member at the bar. I do honest work, which means if I think your program is structured wrong, I'm going to say so. Good, she said. I need someone who'll say so. He nodded once. Thank you, she said. For tonight, for all of it. My daughter dragged me here, he said. Thank her. Victoria looked at Emma, who accepted the attention with the equanimity of someone who had learned that adults sometimes made her responsible for things she only partially controlled. Thank you, Emma, Victoria said. You're welcome, Emma said seriously. The Linzer cookies were really good. Victoria laughed. A real one this time, not the social register. The unguarded sound of someone genuinely caught off guard. I'll make sure we have them at every event, she said. That seems like a reasonable policy, Emma said, and pressed the elevator button. In the elevator going down, Emma stood beside her father in the particular quality of quiet that exists between people who have been somewhere together and are carrying the night with them. The lobby appeared below them through the glass wall of the elevator, the marble and the brass and the flower arrangements, all of it smaller now from 53 floors up. Dad? Emma said. Yeah. Ms. Hale was really nice. Yeah, he agreed. She was. Like, actually nice. Not the kind of nice people do when they want something from you. He glanced at her. You can tell the difference? Usually, she said. Mom taught me. She looked back at the descending lobby. She said the real kind is quieter. It doesn't try to get noticed. Damon said nothing for a moment. Outside the elevator, the city shifted past in panels of glass and light. Yeah, he said finally. She was right about that. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened onto the marble lobby, and the string quartet had long since packed up, and the doorman held the door with professional courtesy. And outside Manhattan was doing what Manhattan does at 10 o'clock on a winter night, which is hum at a frequency that suggests everything is possible and also nothing is guaranteed. They walked out into it together, and Emma reached up and took her father's hand, which she still did sometimes when she felt like it, and was old enough not to care who saw, and Damon held it the way he held most things he was afraid of losing, carefully, without drawing attention to how tightly. They found hot chocolate at a diner 3 blocks from the subway entrance. It was the kind of place that had been there since before either of them was born. Formica countertops, vinyl stools, a laminated menu with photographs of food that looked significantly better in person than they did on the laminate. The fluorescent lighting was honest in the way expensive restaurants were not, which meant the booths were slightly worn, and the coffee smell was real, and the woman who brought them their drinks had the specific tiredness of a double shift and didn't perform anything about it. Emma wrapped both hands around her mug. Damon did the same, because the night was cold and the walk had been longer than he'd planned. Are you glad we went? Emma asked. He thought about this honestly. Yeah, he said. I think so. Even the beginning part? The beginning part was not great, he admitted. But the rest was... He turned the mug slightly. Unexpected. Emma nodded, processing this with the thoroughness she applied to most things. She had a habit of taking what adults said and turning it over a few times before deciding what she thought of it, which was one of the qualities Damon both admired and occasionally found exhausting about her. Miss Hale seems like she really wants to help, she said. She seems that way, yeah. You don't think she does? I think she means it right now, he said. Whether she follows through is a different question. You're very skeptical of people, Emma observed. I'm measured, he corrected. That's a polite way of saying skeptical. It is, he agreed, but I've been burned by people who meant things in the moment and didn't mean them a month later. So I try not to count on things until they happen. Emma considered this. Mom wasn't like that. No. Your mom gave people the benefit of the doubt until they demonstrated otherwise. He looked at his mug. It worked out about the same percentage of the time as my way. She was just a lot easier to be around. Emma smiled at that. The real one. The gap-toothed version. I think you should give Ms. Hale the benefit of the doubt, she said. She hired someone to find you for 3 years. That's not a moment thing. That's a commitment thing. Damon looked at his daughter. Sometimes she assembled logic in ways that were difficult to argue with, not because she was manipulative, but because she was simply correct. "You're right," he said. "I know." She took a sip of hot chocolate and left a thin line of it on her upper lip that she didn't immediately notice. "Are you going to go to the meeting?" "I said I would. You say a lot of things and do them. That's one of your better qualities." "I have others." "You're a good cook," she said generously. "Thank you. And you parallel park really well." "Anything else?" She pretended to think. "You're good at fixing the sink when it makes that sound." "High praise," he said. "Really?" She wiped the hot chocolate from her lip with the back of her hand and looked out the diner window at the street, where a taxi and a delivery bike were negotiating a disagreement at the corner in the wordless language of New York traffic. "I think something changed tonight," she said. "Not just for us, for the room." Damon followed her gaze to the window. "Maybe," he said. "I could feel it when you were talking, the way people got quiet." She turned back to him. "Not because you were saying something impressive, because you were saying something true. And I think a lot of them weren't used to hearing true things at events like that." He didn't say anything. "Is that weird to say?" she asked. "No," he said. "It's probably accurate." She nodded. "Good." She finished the last of her hot chocolate and set the mug down with the decisiveness of someone who has concluded a chapter. "I'm glad I made us go." "Yeah," he said. "Me too." He didn't sleep well. This was not unusual. He hadn't slept well in a reliable, consistent way since before his last deployment, and the years since hadn't repaired it so much as taught him to function around it. He lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about Warren Stiles' card in his shirt pocket, and Victoria's offer, and the conversation on stage, and the way the room had gone quiet in a way that had nothing to do with him performing anything. He thought about Claire, not the specific grief of it, that had softened into something more like a presence than an absence. The way light changes in a room when a window is blocked, but eventually you stop noticing the particular quality of the light you're missing. He thought about what Victoria had said. "You're thinking about what she lost." He'd never framed it that way before, and the framing bothered him slightly because it was more accurate than the version he'd been carrying. Claire would have known exactly what to do with tonight. She would have come home and talked about the people and the room and what it meant with the analytical warmth she applied to everything, not coldly, not clinically, but with genuine interest in how people worked and why they did what they did. She would have made Emma a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table with her and extracted every detail of the evening with the patience of someone who genuinely wanted to know. Damon got up at 5:30, the way he always did, and made coffee in the kitchen while the apartment was still dark and Emma was still asleep. And he stood at the counter and drank it and did not think about what the morning would have looked like if Claire were in it. He'd stopped doing that mostly. It didn't help, and it cost something he couldn't afford to keep spending. He picked Warren Stiles' card off the counter, where he'd left it the night before, and read it again in the kitchen light. Warren Stiles, Stiles Development Group. The address was in Midtown. There was a direct number handwritten on the back, which meant the man had anticipated giving it out and had written it before the event. That was a data point. He put the card back down and finished his coffee. On Monday morning, Emma went to school and Damon went to the Long Island City site to walk through the space with his crew chief, a compact, unhurried man named Tony Rhea, who'd been in construction for 22 years and communicated in a language of small, specific gestures and the occasional decisive sentence. The space was a former warehouse, 4 floors, being converted into open-plan office suites for a tech company that had leased the building for 8 years and wanted it done by April. It was the kind of job that was straightforward until it wasn't. The bones were good, the timeline was aggressive, and there was a plumbing situation on the 3rd floor that had revealed itself during demo and was going to require either renegotiating the timeline or working 2 crews simultaneously. "Second crew's going to cost you," Tony said, standing in the 3rd floor space with his hands in his pockets and the particular posture of someone who has already done the math. "I know," Damon said. "But if we miss the April deadline, we lose the bonus and probably the follow-on contract." You already have a follow-on? I have a conversation about a follow-on, same as having one, in this market, if the first job goes well. Tony nodded slowly. He looked at the exposed plumbing with the squinting evaluation of someone who has made peace with the fact that walls always contain surprises. Second crew, he said. I know a guy. He reliable? Reliably good, reliably expensive. Get me a number, Damon said. Already have one. I texted you this morning. Damon pulled out his phone and checked. Tony had indeed texted him a number at 6:47 in the morning. Damon looked at it, did the math in his head against the project budget, and arrived at an answer that was tight, but not impossible. Tell him we're in, he said. Tony pulled out his own phone. He called without walking away, which was a thing Damon appreciated about him. No theater, no performance of privacy, just a direct call placed and a brief conversation conducted in the business-like shorthand of people who'd worked together enough times that sentences didn't need to be finished. While Tony was on the phone, Damon's own phone buzzed. An unknown number, Manhattan area code. He picked it up. Mr. Cross, a woman's voice, crisp and efficient. This is Nadia. I'm Victoria Hale's executive assistant. Miss Hale asked me to reach out regarding a meeting she mentioned to you on Saturday evening. Right, he said. She wanted to give you a few options for the week after next, if that works for your schedule. He looked around the third-floor space, the exposed infrastructure, the light coming through the dirty industrial windows. Tony still on the phone, his own reflection dimly visible in the glass. Yeah, he said. That works. They settled on a Thursday morning. The assistant gave him the address, a building in the 40s that he'd actually driven past 100 times without registering, and told him to ask for her when he arrived. When he hung up, Tony had finished his call and was watching him with the expression he used when he had a question but wasn't sure it was his business. Something good? Tony asked. Something interesting, Damon said. Tell you later. What's the status on the second floor? The week passed the way construction weeks always did, in a series of small problems that each required a specific solution and left no time for anything that couldn't be resolved with information already in hand. The alternator on the truck lasted through Thursday before it didn't, which cost him $400 at a shop on Northern Boulevard that gave him a straight price without the runaround. Emma had a history project due Friday, a timeline of the civil rights movement that she'd been working on since October with the focused seriousness she brought to academic work. And Damon proofread it Wednesday night at the kitchen table while she ate cereal and pretended not to care what he thought about it. It's good, he said. You're saying that because you're my dad. I'm saying it because I actually read it. He turned the last page. Your section on the legal strategy is better than most adults' understanding of it. She looked up. Really? Really? She went back to her cereal. Ms. Patterson said I should cite more primary sources. Your bibliography looks fine to me. I added 3 more yesterday. Then it's definitely fine. She ate in silence for a moment. Then, did the lady call you from Ms. Hale's office? Last Monday. And? I have a meeting Thursday after next. Emma stirred her cereal. Are you nervous? I don't get nervous, he said. She gave him the look this statement deserved. I get prepared, he amended, which is different. How are you preparing? I spent some time reading about how veteran employment programs have worked in other cities. What's succeeded, what hasn't. He set her project down. If I go into that meeting and she's proposing something that's already been tried and failed without understanding why it failed, I want to be able to say so. Emma nodded slowly. And if her program is good, then I'll say that too. And then what? He looked at his daughter. Then we'll figure out what happens next. Thursday morning arrived with the particular gray clarity of a November day that hasn't decided what it's going to do. Damon put on the navy blazer and the dark slacks from the gala, because they were the best things he owned that weren't work clothes, and he took the subway to Midtown and walked 3 blocks to the building and gave his name to the security desk, where Nadia was already waiting to collect him. She was young and moved quickly, and had the specific energy of someone who managed a very busy person's schedule and had accommodated chaos into their baseline. She walked him to the elevator and up to the 31st floor and through a set of glass doors into an office that was not what he'd expected. He'd expected something that announced itself. The corner office cliches, the statement furniture, the view arranged for maximum impact. What he got was a large room that was clearly used as a working space rather than a performing one. There were books on the shelves that had been read, not arranged by color. There was a whiteboard along one wall covered in what looked like a project map, with different colored markers and arrows and boxes containing text too small to read from across the room. There was a conference table in the center that had several chairs around it, and a coffee station in the corner that looked like it had been built into the space out of necessity rather than decoration. Victoria was on the phone when he arrived, standing by the window in the same composed, forward-leaning posture she'd had at the gala, except dressed now for work. Dark slacks, a deep blue sweater, her hair down in a way that made her look slightly more human and slightly less like someone's idea of a CEO. She held up one finger when she saw him, the universal gesture for 1 minute, and he sat down at the conference table and looked at the whiteboard while she finished her call. The whiteboard he could read more of now. It appeared to be the structure of something. There were boxes labeled intake and skills mapping, an employer network, and mentorship. Pipeline and follow-up cycle, with arrows connecting them in various configurations and notes, in at least 2 different handwriting styles, which meant this wasn't just hers. She hung up. Sorry, that was the Bronx Borough President's office, which is related to why you're here, so I didn't want to reschedule it. No problem, he said. She poured coffee and brought 2 mugs to the table, which he noted, not because it was remarkable on its own, but because there was a small service table in the corner with coffee already set out, and she hadn't used it. She'd poured from a different machine behind her desk, the kind of automatic detail that tells you something about whether a person has help getting coffee as a default or does it themselves. Philip couldn't be here, she said. His daughter had something at school. Dr. Reyes is coming by phone in about 20 minutes. She's in Chicago right now and her flight was moved. Okay, Damon said. So it's just us for now. For now. She sat down across from him and pulled a folder from a stack near the edge of the table. I want to show you what I've been thinking about, and then I want you to tell me what's wrong with it. He looked at the folder. You're not pitching it? I'm sharing it. There's a difference. She opened the folder and slid several pages toward him. What I know about running a business, I know well. What I know about being a veteran transitioning out of service, I know secondhand and probably imperfectly. She looked at him directly. I don't need someone to validate this. I need someone to break it. He pulled the pages toward him and read. It took him 7 minutes. He read everything once and went back to 2 sections a second time without saying anything. She let him do it without filling the silence, which he appreciated. When he set the pages down, she was watching him. The intake process is wrong, he said. Tell me. You're using a resume-based screening. Military experience doesn't translate well to standard resume formats. Someone who spent 4 years as a team leader in a special operations unit has management experience that's more complex than most mid-level corporate managers. But if you put it on a resume, it looks like a service record, not a leadership history. Your screeners are going to miss people. She made a note. What would you replace it with? A conversation. An actual interview focused on what they've done, not how they've described it. Probably conducted by someone who's either been in service or has enough experience with veterans to ask the right questions. He looked at the pages again. The skills mapping section is better than I expected. The framework is right. But the timeline for employer matching is too compressed. You've got 12 weeks from intake to placement, and that doesn't account for the adjustment period. Some people need more time to relearn how to be a civilian. Meaning the culture gap is real. It's not a skills gap. Most veterans are more skilled than the employers they're being matched with realize. It's a translation gap, and it takes time to build a vocabulary that lets you operate in a corporate environment if you've spent years operating in a military one. He paused. I've got guys on my crew who came out of the Army and spent their first year being passed over for jobs they were qualified for because they couldn't do the interview, not because they were bad at the work. Because the interview is its own skill and nobody taught it to them. Victoria was writing steadily. What else? The mentorship model assumes mentors who've made the transition successfully, which is right. But you need to be careful about selection. The people who transitioned smoothly aren't always the best mentors for people who didn't. Sometimes the struggle is the useful part. She looked up. You think the mentors should be people who found it hard. I think the best mentors are people who found it hard and got through it anyway and can explain how. Not people it came naturally to. He paused. The ones it came naturally to sometimes can't tell you what they did because they didn't have to think about it. She set her pen down and looked at him. You've thought about this. I've lived it, he said, which is different. Yes. She looked at her notes. Significantly different. She was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask. What was the hardest part of the transition for you? He thought about it without rushing. Not knowing what I was worth, he said. In the military, rank tells you. Your position tells you. There's a structure and you know where you are in it and what that means. When you come out, none of that exists. You're starting over in a system where the metrics are different and nobody's explained what they are. He paused. I started my company partly because it let me build my own structure. I knew what a job well done looked like because I'd been the one who defined it. That's a different thing than applying for someone else's version of success. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, that's going to change how I think about the employer matching section. How? I've been framing it as helping veterans access existing corporate structures. But what you're describing is more fundamental than that. It's the self-valuation piece, before they can even get to the employer. You need both, he said. You can't skip the employer piece. People need income. But yeah, you need the other thing first, or the placement doesn't stick. She picked up her pen again. Would you consult on the redesign? I told you, I came here to have a conversation. I know what you told me. She held his gaze. I'm asking you to extend the conversation, formally, paid, structured, with a clear scope so neither of us overcommits. She paused. This program is going to affect a significant number of people. I want it built right, and I don't have the information to do that without someone who knows the terrain. Damon looked at the whiteboard, at the boxes and the arrows and the two different handwriting styles, and the sense that this was a thing actually being built rather than being planned for a press release. Give me a scope and a rate, and I'll think about it, he said. Fair, she said. Dr. Reyes called in at 9:48, and they spent 40 minutes on the phone with her going through the program framework section by section, with Victoria pulling in Damon's observations and Dr. Reyes responding with the precise data-informed analysis of someone who had done this work for a decade in 3 different cities. She and Damon disagreed on one point, the timeline, and argued it out in a way that was productive rather than adversarial, because they were both operating from evidence and neither of them was performing. By the end of the call, the section had been substantially revised. Good, Dr. Reyes said. This version makes sense. The earlier version was going to fail at week 8. I know, Victoria said. That's why he's here. Who are you? Dr. Reyes said, apparently to Damon. Damon Cross, he said. He's the one from the gala, Victoria said. That I mentioned. A pause on the line. Oh, Dr. Reyes said, in a tone that suggested the word was doing significant work. Well, welcome aboard, Damon. I haven't committed to anything yet, he said. That's fine, she said. You will. She didn't say it with arrogance, just the calm confidence of someone who could read a conversation and knew what it meant. I'll have the revised framework to you by end of week, Victoria. Nice to meet you, Damon. The call ended. Victoria looked at him across the conference table. You will, she repeated. She might be right, he said. I'm not saying yet. Understood. She closed her folder. There's something else I want to talk about. He waited. She took a breath, the slight preparatory kind that meant what came next had been thought through. Emma's education, she said. I told her, at the gala, when you were on stage, that I wanted to talk to you about helping with it. You said it publicly, he said. His voice was level. Which is a different thing. I know. She held his gaze. I meant it. I also knew that saying it in front of people, including your daughter, was a way of making sure you couldn't easily say no without it feeling like something other than what it was. He looked at her. What was it? A genuine offer. She paused, and a slight manipulation. I'm being honest about both. The honesty landed cleanly. He'd been around enough people who weren't honest about what they were doing to recognize and appreciate the ones who were. Continue, he said. Emma is 9. She's clearly exceptional. Whatever she decides to do, school, college, graduate work, she shouldn't be limited by what's available. Her voice was matter of fact, not charitable, not patronizing. I have a foundation. I fund educational programs. The structure already exists for this. She looked at him steadily. What I'm proposing is not a gift. It's an investment in a person who has already demonstrated at 9 years old the kind of character that makes investments worthwhile. Damon was quiet. This was the kind of offer he'd spent his life being suspicious of, not because people with resources didn't sometimes give them honestly, but because the terms usually turned out to involve something he hadn't agreed to. He'd learned to read the fine print not in documents, but in the air around an offer, in the pauses and the framings. This one didn't smell like that. And that made him more careful, not less, because the ones that didn't smell like anything were the ones that could still go sideways. What does Emma get to decide about this? He asked. Victoria looked slightly surprised. What do you mean? If I accept something on her behalf without her input, I'm making a decision about her future that she's old enough to be part of. He paused. She saved $43 and carried it to a gala to donate it because she made that choice herself. I'm not going to take something for her and then hand it to her as an accomplished fact. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You're going to make this harder than it needs to be. No, he said. I'm going to make it right, which is sometimes the same thing as harder. He looked at his hands on the table for a moment, then back at her. I'm not saying no. I'm saying she needs to be in the conversation. She's 9, and she's smart enough to understand what you're offering and what it means and whether she wants it. He paused. She understood everything that happened at the gala. You talked to her for 10 minutes, and you know that. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. You're right, she said. I'll wait until you've had a chance to talk to her and she can come back and we can talk together. He nodded once. Thank you. I'm not thanking me until she says yes, Victoria said, and there was a slight dry humor in it. She'll say yes, Damon said. She's 9, not unreasonable. And if she has conditions, then you'll hear her conditions. He called Warren Stiles that afternoon from the truck outside the Long Island City site. The call went through in 2 rings, which meant the man had actually expected it. Cross, Warren said. I was starting to think you'd lost the card. I was going to wait until Monday, Damon said. Changed my mind. What changed it? I had a meeting this morning that reminded me that conversations have to actually happen to amount to anything. He looked out the windshield at the warehouse facade, the new windows they'd put in last week still covered with protective film. Tell me about the Bronx project, Warren told him. It took about 15 minutes, and Warren talked the way people who know what they're doing talk about the things they know, with specificity, with acknowledgement of the complications, without pretending the difficult parts weren't difficult. The affordable housing component was real, not a token percentage for the tax structure. The timeline was aggressive but not fraudulent. The community board had been involved in the planning, which was either genuine or performance, and Warren acknowledged that distinction directly, rather than waiting to be asked about it. I want to be straight with you, Damon said when Warren had finished. I'm a small operation. 4 guys and a leased truck. The scale you're describing is bigger than anything I've managed. I know, Warren said. I asked about you after Saturday night. And the 2 clients I reached said you finish what you start. You don't pad bills. And you told one of them their kitchen renovation was going to cost 40% more than the original estimate because of something you found in the walls. And you gave them the option to scale back rather than just expanding the scope and charging for it. A pause. That's rarer than it should be. Damon said nothing. I don't need you to run the project, Warren said. I've got a project manager. I need someone on the ground who has the judgment to make calls when the PM isn't there, and the character to make them honestly. He paused. I've got a lot of contractors who are technically capable. I need one I can trust when I'm not looking. The phrase sat in the air of the truck for a moment. "I'd need to see the full project specs before I commit," Damon said, "and I need it to not conflict with the work I'm already running." "Understood. I'll have my office send the specs today." A pause. "For what it's worth, cross what you said Saturday night about character not announcing itself." He seemed to consider how to continue. "I've been in development for 30 years. I've shaken more hands in fancy rooms than I can count, and I've made a lot of money, and some of it I'm proud of, and some of it I'm not." He paused. "It's been a while since I was in a room where someone said something that made me think about which was which." Damon didn't say anything to that. "Anyway," Warren said, "I'll send the specs. Call me when you've looked." "I will," Damon said, and hung up. He sat in the truck for a moment in the gray November afternoon with the engine running and the heat on low and the protective film on the warehouse windows, catching the light in a way that made them look almost mirror-like. He thought about Emma at school right now, working through a Tuesday with the focused intentionality she brought to school days. He thought about the history project on the kitchen table, the careful handwriting, the section on legal strategy that was better than most adults understood it. He thought about Claire, who would have said something precise and true about all of this, who would have had words for the thing he was feeling, which was not quite hope and not quite caution, but something that lived in the territory between them. The specific feeling of a door opening that you weren't expecting and standing in the threshold trying to figure out if it leads somewhere you should go. He put the truck in drive. He had a crew on the third floor waiting for direction about the plumbing situation, and Tony had texted 3 times, and the afternoon was already half gone. He'd think about the rest of it later, at the kitchen table, when Emma got home and dropped her backpack by the door with the specific thud that meant she had too much in it, and put on his old flannel shirt that hung past her knees, and came to find him to tell him about her day before he could ask. Some things you could plan for and some things you couldn't, and knowing the difference had always been the larger part of the work. The specs from Warren Stiles arrived that evening in a PDF that Damon read at the kitchen table after dinner while Emma did homework across from him, her pencil moving in the specific rhythm of someone working through math problems that require concentration but not struggle. The project was bigger than he'd let himself imagine when Warren described it on the phone. 4 city blocks in the South Bronx, mixed-use development, 3 residential towers with 240 units total, a third of them designated affordable at genuine below-market rates, not the kind of technical compliance that developers use to satisfy requirements while building nothing that working families could actually live in. There was a commercial ground floor component, a community space that had been designed in collaboration with the local council, a green roof on the largest building that someone had clearly thought about carefully rather than added as an afterthought. Damon read the construction timeline twice. It was aggressive, the way Warren had said, but not fraudulent. The phases were sequenced by someone who understood how buildings actually went up rather than how they looked on a presentation slide. He set the PDF down and looked at the far wall of the kitchen for a moment. "What is it?" Emma said, without looking up from her homework. "Work thing." "Good work thing or complicated work thing?" "Both." She looked up. She had a pencil mark on her left cheek from where she'd rested her face on her hand. "Tell me." He told her about Warren Stiles and the Bronx Project in the same level, factual way he told her most things. Not simplified, not dramatized, just the actual information. She listened with the pencil held loosely in one hand, her homework forgotten for the moment, which was a reliable indicator that she considered something genuinely worth attending to. 240 units, she said when he finished. "Yeah, that's a lot of families." "It is." She looked at her homework and then back at him. "Are you going to do it?" "I'm thinking about it." "What's the part you're thinking about?" "Whether I can run something this size without it falling apart." He was honest about it the way he was always honest with her. Not performing certainty he didn't have, not manufacturing doubt he didn't feel either. "My crew is good, but this is a different scale." Emma considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Tony's been doing this for 22 years, she said. "He has." "And you said Warren Stiles has a project manager." "He does." "So it's not just you." "It's never just me," he said. "But ultimately, if something goes wrong, I'm the one who has to answer for it." Emma nodded slowly. That's always been true, though, she said. Even on the small jobs. He looked at her. She was right. In the simple, direct way, she was often right. Not because she understood the complexities better than him, but because she had a way of locating the essential thing without the interference of all the other considerations that accumulated around it in adult thinking. Yeah, he said. That's always been true. She picked up her pencil. I think you should do it, she said, and went back to her math. He called Warren the next morning and told him he was interested and needed 2 more weeks to assess the staffing before committing. Warren said that was reasonable. The 2 weeks passed in the daily accumulation of the Long Island City job, the plumbing situation resolved, the second crew integrated, the project manager from the tech company doing a walkthrough on a Wednesday afternoon and leaving satisfied. And at the end of them, Damon called Warren back and said yes. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Warren said he'd have the contract to him by Friday. Damon said he'd have it reviewed by Monday. That was how it went. No ceremony, no celebration, just 2 people who'd agreed to do a thing and were now doing the thing. Tony, when Damon told him, was quiet for a moment in the way Tony was quiet about most things, and then said, Bronx. South Bronx, Damon confirmed. Mixed use. Yeah. Another pause. I know a guy for the curtain wall work. Is he the kind of guy who shows up? Every time. Then get me his number, Damon said. The meeting with Victoria and Emma happened on a Saturday, 3 weeks after the gala. Emma had been told about it the week before and had spent the intervening days asking occasional questions. Not anxious ones, just the information-gathering kind, the ones that told you a person was taking something seriously. She wore her navy dress again. When Damon noticed, he didn't say anything about it. Some things were better observed than commented on. Victoria's office on a Saturday was quieter. Nadia wasn't there, and the building had the weekend stillness of a space that was used hard during the week and let breathe on the weekends. Victoria met them in the lobby herself, which Emma noted with the slight widening of attention she gave to things that were different from what she'd expected. They sat at the conference table, the 3 of them, and Victoria explained the educational fund clearly and directly, without talking down to Emma or performing warmth she didn't feel. She explained what it covered: tuition, materials, any educational program Emma chose to pursue from now through graduate school, and what it didn't require, which was anything except Emma's own continued commitment to her own education. Emma listened without interrupting. When Victoria finished, Emma said, Can I ask you something? Of course. Why? Victoria looked at her. What do you mean? Why me specifically? Emma's voice was careful, not challenging. You could fund a lot of kids' education with this money. Why are you choosing to do it for me? Victoria was quiet for a moment. It was the kind of question that deserved to not be answered quickly. Partly because of your father, she said, and what he did 3 years ago, and what he said at the gala, and what I understand about who he is. She paused. But mostly because of you, because of what you did Saturday night. She held Emma's gaze. You saved $43 for 3 months to give to nurses who took care of you. You did it without telling anyone. You did it because it was the right thing to do and you decided that privately and just carried it out. She looked at the table for a moment and then back at Emma. That kind of character is not something money produces. It's something money can either help or fail to serve. She paused. I'd rather help it. Emma was quiet. I'm not doing this out of obligation to your father, Victoria said. I want that to be clear. This isn't a transaction. I know, Emma said. I can tell. A beat. Can I think about it? Emma said. Damon, beside her, kept his expression neutral. Victoria, across the table, did the same, though something moved briefly behind her eyes that might have been surprise. Of course, Victoria said. Not for long, Emma said. Just, I want to think about what it means to accept something this big. She looked at her hands on the table. My mom used to say that every gift has a weight to it. Not a cost, a weight. And you should make sure you can carry it before you pick it up. The room was very quiet. Victoria said, "Your mom sounds like she was remarkable." "She was," Emma said simply. "She was better than both of us." She glanced at her father as she said it, a quick, sideways glance that contained a whole private language. Then she looked back at Victoria. "I'll let you know by the end of the week." She let them know by Tuesday. Her answer was yes. The Meridian Foundation's Veteran Employment Program launched 7 months later, in the middle of June, at an event that was nothing like the gala. It was held in a community center in the Bronx, 2 blocks from the development site where Damon's crew is currently in the second phase of construction. And it had folding chairs and a podium borrowed from the building's main hall, and food from a local catering company run by a veteran who had found his way into the restaurant industry after 8 years in the Marines. There were 47 veterans enrolled in the first cohort. Damon knew 8 of them personally, men and women he'd encountered through the contracting world, through veteran networks, through the loose informal infrastructure of people who'd been in service and were trying to figure out what came next. He wasn't on the stage at the launch event. He was in the 3rd row with Emma, who had school the next day and had done her homework in the car on the way over with a flashlight and a book propped on her knees. Victoria spoke for 12 minutes. She talked about the program without talking about herself, which was harder than it sounded, and which Damon had come to understand was a deliberate choice on her part. She had the instinct for self-effacement that good leaders sometimes develop when they've spent enough time seeing what credit-taking does to the people around them. Dr. Reyes spoke for 8 minutes and was more specific, going through the program's structure with the precision of someone who had helped build it and wanted people to understand exactly what they were getting into. She acknowledged the places where the model was imperfect and would need revision, which Damon had specifically asked her to do, because he'd sat through enough launch events in his life to know that the ones that pretended to have everything figured out were the ones that fell apart at week 8. When it was over, and people were standing in small groups eating food and talking, a man appeared at Damon's elbow. Late 30s, compact build, the particular stillness in the posture that you recognized if you knew what to look for. "Army?" Damon said. "Rangers," the man said. 8 years. He looked slightly surprised. "How'd you know?" "The way you stand," Damon said. "I'm Navy." "SEAL?" "Yeah." The man looked at him for a moment. "You're Cross," he said. "From the gala." "I'm Cross," Damon agreed. "My buddy sent me the video. Someone filmed your speech." He paused. "I'd been out for 2 years, couldn't get anyone to call me back on a job application. I watched it 3 times. He looked at the room, at the program staff setting up intake tables, at the other veterans moving through the space. "I enrolled the next day." Damon said nothing for a moment. He'd been told, in the months since the gala, that the video existed. Someone had filmed his remarks on a phone, and it had circulated in veteran communities online. He'd never watched it. He didn't plan to. "How's it going?" he asked. "The process so far?" "First intake meeting was last week. They actually listened." The man sounded faintly surprised by this, in the way people sound surprised by things that should be standard but aren't. "Didn't just hand me a form. Asked me what I'd actually done, asked me what I was good at and what I wanted to do." He paused. "First time in 2 years someone asked what I wanted to do." Damon nodded. "I'm a plumber," the man said. "Was. In the Army, I did a lot of infrastructure work, water systems, sanitation, kept forward operating bases running in conditions you couldn't run a normal job site in." He looked slightly embarrassed. "I couldn't get a union card when I came out. Kept getting told I didn't have the right certifications, even though I'd been doing the work for 8 years in places where if I got it wrong, people died." "I might know someone," Damon said. The man looked at him. "I've got a project in the Bronx. We're in the second phase. I need licensed plumbers, but I've also got people who do the work and are working on the licensing in parallel." He paused. "Come see me next week. Bring whatever documentation you have from your service. I'm not promising anything, but let's talk." The man was quiet for a moment. "Why would you do that?" he said. "You don't know me." "I know what you just told me," Damon said. "That's enough to have a conversation." Emma appeared at his side. She'd been across the room talking to Dr. Reyes with the focused attention she gave to adults she found interesting, and looked between Damon and the man without interrupting. "This is my daughter Emma," Damon said. The man looked at her. She the one with the envelope? That's me, Emma said. He laughed, a short, genuine sound. My buddy told me about that too. He looked at her with the expression adults got when they were recalibrating their assumptions about a child. $43. $43, she confirmed. That turned into a lot, he said. Emma considered this seriously. I think it would have turned into whatever it turned into regardless, she said. The money was just the reason we were in the room. The man looked at Damon. She's something. I know, Damon said. I'm reminded of it regularly. On the subway home, Emma fell asleep against his arm before they'd gone 4 stops. She did this sometimes on late nights, went hard until she didn't, and then was simply asleep, with the completeness of a child who hadn't yet learned to resist unconsciousness when it came. He held his arm still so she wouldn't shift. Outside the subway windows, the city moved past in its nighttime configurations, the lit windows of apartments, the stations sliding by, the other passengers each contained in their own separate moment. Damon Cross, 33 years old, sat on a subway with his sleeping daughter and thought about the last several months in the unorganized way you think about things when you're not trying to arrive at a conclusion. He thought about the gala and Garrett and the way the room had gone quiet. He thought about Victoria at the conference table, making notes in the margins of her program design, saying, I need someone who'll say so. He thought about Warren's voice on the phone talking about buildings and families and the difference between the work he was proud of and the work he wasn't. He thought about the man at the launch event tonight, 8 years doing infrastructure work in conditions where getting it wrong meant people died, and 2 years afterward unable to get a union card. He thought about the gap between what people are and what the visible evidence of them suggests, and how often those two things have almost nothing to do with each other, and how much work it takes, how much ongoing, deliberate, never-finished work, to keep looking past the surface toward the actual person underneath. He thought about Claire. He thought about her the way he'd been slowly learning to think about her, not as a loss exactly, though it was that, but as a source. A person whose clarity and directness and willingness to say the true thing had shaped him in ways that continued operating in him even now, like a structure that still stood after the person who built it was gone. She would have been 47 veterans deep into organizing the volunteer mentorship component by now. She would have known the Rangers veteran's name by the end of the first conversation. She would have thought Emma's condition about thinking the offer over was exactly right. And she would have said so, and Emma had never known her mother well enough to know that. And that was the grief that had no clean resolution. Not the loss itself, but the accumulating distance between a daughter and the mother she was becoming more like every year without knowing it. Emma shifted in her sleep, pressed closer. Damon put his arm around her and looked at the window, which in the tunnel sections showed nothing but the reflection of the car interior. The lit seats, the other passengers, himself with his daughter asleep against his arm, the faded blazer he still hadn't replaced, the face of a man who'd had a long several months and was tired in the particular way that comes from things going mostly right rather than mostly wrong. He'd been expecting it to feel like more, somehow. The program launching, the Bronx project moving, the meeting with Emma and Victoria, the man from the Rangers talking about the intake process like it was something that had changed the quality of his days. He'd been braced, without knowing it, for some moment of arrival, for the thing that would tell him the scale had tipped decisively towards something good. It didn't feel like that. It felt like Tuesday, like a subway car and a sleeping kid and a city moving past the windows and a week of work ahead and a Friday movie tradition they'd kept without exception since Emma was 6, through deployments and illness and one very bad winter, because some things you kept not because they were grand, but because the keeping of them was itself the point. He wasn't a different person than he'd been before the gala. That was the part he'd been turning over, in the small hours of nights when he was awake and the apartment was quiet. He'd walked in that night as someone nobody in the room knew anything about, and he'd walked out as someone the room had decided was significant, and the gap between those two versions of him was nothing, because he was the same 4 guys and the leased truck, the same kitchen table and the same half-full fridge, the same Friday nights. What had changed was the surrounding territory, the things that now existed in his orbit that hadn't before, The program, the project, the conversations with Victoria that had evolved from professional into something that might eventually be called friendship. The 47 veterans in the first cohort who were, right now, in the process of discovering whether the gap that had stalled them could be bridged. Those were real. Those mattered. But they didn't change what he was at the center, which was someone who got up at 5:30 and made coffee, and went to work and came home and made dinner and sat at the kitchen table across from his daughter while she did her homework, and who had never needed a room to stand up for him to know what his own life was worth. He tried to say something like that on stage that night. He wasn't sure he'd gotten it right. He wasn't sure it mattered whether he had. The room had heard what the room was ready to hear, and he wasn't responsible for being the origin point of anyone else's understanding. He'd just told the truth, in the room where it was needed, at the moment when it was possible to tell it. That was the whole of what he'd done. The rest of it, the program, the project, the $43 becoming something larger than itself, had grown from that the way most things grow from small, honest acts. Not because the act was heroic, because it was visible and real, and it found the people who were ready to do something with it. The subway slowed. Their stop. Damon shifted carefully, trying not to wake Emma. She woke anyway. She always did, some part of her tuned to the specific rhythm of the train, and straightened up and blinked and looked around with the slight disorientation of someone re-entering the world from sleep. "Our stop?" she said. "Yeah." She stood, picked up her bag, walked off the train with him in the specific way she walked when she was still half asleep, following his direction rather than navigating herself, trusting him to know where they were going, which she did completely and without ever saying so. The street outside was cool and quiet, the neighborhood evening still, a few lights on in the windows above the bodegas and the laundromat and the pharmacy that had been there as long as anyone could remember. "Dad," Emma said, beside him, walking with her bag over one shoulder and her hands in her jacket pockets. "Yeah." "What movie Friday?" He thought about it. "Your pick." "I picked last week." "And it was a good pick. You've earned another one." She considered this with the gravity of someone to whom movie selection was not a trivial matter. "Can we do the one about the dog again? We've seen it 4 times. "I know. I want to see it a 5th time." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because the ending still makes me cry," she said, straightforwardly, without embarrassment. "And I think things that make you cry are worth watching more than once." He looked at the street ahead of them, the familiar block, the building with the light above the entrance that had been slightly tilted since before they moved in, and that the super kept meaning to fix. "Okay," he said. "The dog one." She nodded, satisfied. They walked the last half block in silence, and he held the door for her, and she went inside and he followed, and the door closed behind them on the city and the night and all of it. The gala and the stage and the program and the project and the $43 and the 300 people who had stood up in a room. And what remained was just the 2 of them, climbing the stairs to the apartment where he would unlock the door and she would drop her bag by the entrance with a thud and change into his old flannel shirt, and they would sit in the kitchen for a while before bed, talking about nothing in particular in the way that people talk who have already said the important things and are comfortable in the space that remains. There are people who do large things and know they are large, and they carry that knowledge like a torch, turning it so it catches the light. And there are people who do large things and don't think of them that way at all, who went into a burning building because someone was in it, who told the truth in a room because it was the true thing, who raised a daughter with patience and honesty and showed up every day not because it was heroic, but because it was the job, and the job was worth doing right. The second kind is harder to see coming, and in a city of 8 million people moving fast through their own separate moments, it is easy to walk past them without knowing what you're passing. Easy to look at the faded jacket and the leased truck and the half-full fridge and decide you already know the shape of the life inside. The thing is, character doesn't care whether you see it. It just keeps showing up, quietly, without announcement, in the stairwell and the kitchen and the subway car and the folding chair rows of a community center in the Bronx. In every small, decent choice made without an audience. In every moment when the easier thing was available and the right thing was chosen anyway. That was the whole lesson. It didn't require a stage. It just required someone willing to keep doing it, day after day, Friday after Friday, in the unglamorous and necessary work of being present for the life that was actually in front of them. Damon Cross locked the apartment door. Emma was already in the kitchen, filling the kettle. "Tea?" she called. "Sure," he said, and hung up his jacket and went to join her.